All right, back on the Young Turks. Now we're going to talk about an issue that's also in the news this week that we haven't touched on yet, and that is some new FBI figures on marijuana. And in order to help us have that conversation, we're going to bring on Norm Stamper. He's a retired Seattle police chief. Norm, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thanks very much.
So what's the amazing stat that came out today, Norm? I should say this week, Norm.
Well, actually, it would help if you refresh my memory. I know that the simple facts of marijuana and marijuana arrests and so forth are that over 100 million Americans have smoked marijuana at least once. Every year, almost 2 million Americans are arrested for nonviolent drug offenses. About 830 to 870 of them for marijuana, and of that number, 90% for simple possession.
So the numbers
every minute, I think there are 3 marijuana arrests in this country. That's probably the specific statistic that you were looking at.
That's right, Norm. You know, they came out, the FBI numbers came out this week and said that there's a drug arrest every 18 seconds in the country.
Right.
Every 18 seconds, meaning more than 3 a minute. And when you break it down a little further, it shows that 82.3% of all drug arrests in 08 were for just possession, and 44.3% of drug arrests were for possession of marijuana. Okay, now that's a pretty high number there. Now, when you were police chief, let me start with that, Norm.
Sure.
What percentage of the drug problem, meaning the arrests for drugs, et cetera, and the crime revolving around drugs, the gangs, et cetera, were marijuana, and what percentage was the other drugs?
Well, Seattle's an anomaly as American cities go. For example, contrasted against New York City, which last year made over 40,000 simple marijuana possession arrests. We would make on the magnitude or the order of 300 to 400 a year during the time that I was the chief there. In 2003, this is 3 years after my retirement, the voters of Seattle decided to make marijuana enforcement, binding on both the police department and the prosecutor's office as the lowest enforcement priority in the city. And so those already very small numbers dropped even more dramatically to just a few dozen a year.
Well, I noticed that after Seattle stopped enforcing the marijuana possession, et cetera, that Seattle just went crazy, and that it's nearly fallen off the map in the continental United States.
Yeah, it got ripped apart at the seams. It was just horrific. We had no impact on public health. We had no increase in youthful use of marijuana, and that's a finding that was based on research, but is also totally consistent with what we see in the Netherlands and throughout the world when communities move to normalize marijuana use. It has a very interesting effect, and perhaps it has something to do with reducing, if not eliminating, the mystique that's associated with that particular substance. But we find, for example, that Dutch kids use marijuana at about half the rate of American kids. And we still have, in many jurisdictions, pretty harsh penalties in this country, where, in fact, it has been more or less normalized in the Netherlands.
You know, and it's funny because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I remember when I was a kid in like 4th or 5th grade, so one of my friends came up, and not a friend, somebody I knew from school, came up and offered me marijuana. Because it was illegal, it seemed like so, interesting and different. No one ever came up and offered me cigarettes. Now as under 18, you can't have cigarettes either, right?
That's correct.
But it wasn't a big deal. But the fact that marijuana was illegal made it so interesting.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's something that absolutely cries out to be tried, to be experimented with. But where a society, that has, particularly one that has been conditioned to the insult that is prohibition, decides that for a variety of reasons it is in fact going to normalize a particular substance and regulate that substance, it does in fact remove much of the mystique.
We're talking to Norm Stamper. He's not only retired Seattle police chief, but he's also part of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, 13,000 member organization representing cops, judges, prosecutors, prison wardens, and others who now think it makes sense to legalize and regulate and tax marijuana. Before we get to the taxing part, real quick, I want to go back to that idea because I don't know this, Norm. Throughout the country, not in Seattle because you said it's an anomaly, but throughout the country, what percentage of the drug business is marijuana, roughly, and what percentage is other drugs?
Oh, I would only be guessing because it does vary from one jurisdiction to the next, but let's put that figure at roughly 80%.
80% is marijuana?
When you stop and think about the fact that marijuana is now the country's #1 cash crop, it exceeds corn and wheat combined.
Wow.
It is in the top 3 in 12 states, and in 3 states, California being one of them, where I was born and raised and spent 28 years in the San Diego Police Department. It is the #1 cash crop. And of course, it is a product that is consumed by very large numbers of Americans. It is a product that is essentially unregulated. It is certainly untaxed, and unlike alcohol and tobacco, other drugs, the government benefits not one whit from the commerce associated with that particular drug.
So are you
Heroin,
on board?
cocaine, crystal meth, so on and so forth, they're all very significant issues in communities across the country, but by comparison to the amount of product that's out there, they pale.
Now, are you on board for not just legalizing but taxing marijuana, and how much money do you think roughly that we could raise from that?
Billions of dollars. Professor Jerry Myron at Harvard University, I think, estimated somewhere around $8 or $9 billion a year would be netted. But I think it's also important to point out that if we were to end the drug war and the roughly $70 billion that we pump down the rat hole every year in support of prosecution of the drug war, we would see huge benefits not only to the health and the safety of our communities, but to the budgets of local communities.
You know, there's a Harvard University economist who came up with a number that's even larger, $77 billion a year he thinks we could raise from taxes. Yeah,
we're actually talking about the same economist, and that is Professor Myron, and what he's done and what we have done as members of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition is calculate the total amount of money that we're currently spending and in effect add to that the savings that would result, or the revenue, I should say, that would result if government were to tax and regulate marijuana. So what we'd be looking at is a figure on the order of $77 billion.
Yeah. Now we're out of time, Norm, but I got to tell you, I went from being in the middle in this to absolutely on the side of ending this prohibition, because as you point out in the Netherlands, drug use doesn't go up, it goes down. So there's no downside to it. Taxes, we collect more money, we get rid of the gang warfare, and the use goes down. It's the biggest no-brainer of all time, and of course that's why governments all across the country are against it.
Well, and around the world, we're seeing Latin American countries, Middle Eastern countries, the United Kingdom. Many nations are now beginning to recognize exactly what you're talking about, and we're poised to do something about it finally.
Norm Stamper, retired police chief and part of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Young Turks.
I want to get high, so high.
Have you seen all the TYT videos from today? Check out the Young Turks YouTube channel. Do it already.